I think the stress on the decline of support for Israel in the American Jewish community more broadly, and on campus in particular, may be a little exaggerated. But I do think something appears to be changing when you compare things to the way they were a few decades ago, in the 60s or in the 80s, when I can tell you they were quite different. Many factors are at work here. I can't go into this in any length. The Journal of Palestine Studies, which I edit, is actually about to publish an article which goes into some of the ways in which new media have an impact on this. It'll probably be not in this coming issue, the issue after that. I'm not sure. But I suggest you all look it up when it's published. Many factors are at work here, notably the access of alternative information and views via the internet, which enables young people, all of whom seem to be extremely technically savvy, to compile their own view of the world. In doing this, they often rely on sources closer to events than the mainstream media, blogs, YouTube, newspapers, satellite TV stations in the Middle East, publishing in English or in other languages, and all kinds of sources of information which we simply didn't have in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. In the face of this changing landscape, the Israel advocacy establishment has mounted a number of initiatives all over the landscape, but especially on U.S. campuses. These have included redoubling efforts to positively brand Israel for public opinion generally, but especially for college students. They've included extraordinarily expensive programs to send even more young people to Israel on what I call magical mystery propaganda tours, but call them what you want, Hasbara tours, whatever. They include the establishment of literally scores of Israel studies programs and chairs on U.S. campuses. At the same time, there's been an increase in attempts to exert external pressure on American universities. This involves the mobilization of the media, the mobilization of politicians, the mobilization of off-campus organizations, and sometimes the mobilization of a few outspoken alumni. At many universities, these pressures have thus far been successfully resisted. But at other universities, administrators have caved in when confronted with the attack dog methods of their critics. The record shows that administrators will often not stand up to such powerful outside forces on their own and will only feel obliged to do so if faculty and students insist on academic freedom, insist on faculty responsibility for curriculum and for the promotion and tenure processes, and insist on the insulation of the university from insidious external influences, especially from politicians and the media and outside groups. Now, let me conclude. I began by suggesting that the realm of ideas was a major battlefield for those who were seeking to establish the Zionist project in Palestine at the expense of its indigenous inhabitants. And I went on to suggest that success in this endeavor was crucial to the success of the project. I don't know whether, as a result of the new diversity of opinion that I think is out there in academia, in the media, and in the public space, but not in the political realm at all, it's too early to tell whether there will be a rapid lessening of the intellectual and with it the political hegemony of a particular Zionist perspective, which has been sustained for most of the 20th century. Certainly, the growing availability of new interpretations than were once available, of new narratives, of alternative of ways of seeing things, mean that Americans can begin to make up their own minds, something that wasn't possible when they were restricted to one tendentious, stridently pro-Israel interpretation of facts, as was the case until the recent past. I think there's reason for deep short-term pessimism about the outcome of the political process that determines American Middle East policy, which is why I haven't talked about it. There is reason for deep short-term pessimism about the situation in Palestine and the situation in Israel. Both are endlessly depressing. But there are signs, I think, of encouraging positive longer-term trends in the public sphere in this country. This is not a situation that will change rapidly, however. It took generations and a lot of hard work to establish the myths Israel was built on, and it will take years and a lot of hard work to deconstruct them, and for the generations that are not going to change their minds in many cases to lose their influence. This is a matter partly of time and partly of hard work. I think it'll be a long time before the political situation certainly will change, such that we can expect an end to Israeli impunity. Israel will continue to be protected in pretty much anything it chooses to do by our Congress and by our government. But I think the handwriting may be on the wall. I think that the system of domination and control through the calculated, dosed use of violence and overwhelming power that has obtained in the occupied territories for over 43 years, a system based entirely on violence, and that has maintained the dispossession of the Palestinian people for 62 years, cannot be hidden forever. Maybe it can't be stopped, but it can't be concealed, is my point. The brilliantly conceived discursive artifice, a citadel of lies that has concealed this system of power and control for so long, is actually beginning to crumble. Given the acknowledgement, not by people in the Palestine Center or isolated American academics, given the acknowledgement by Israeli leaders, such as former prime ministers Barak and Olmert, that continuation of the status quo, continuation of the occupation, continuation of settlements, which is happening and will continue to happen, I would argue, for the foreseeable future, will inevitably lead to apartheid and worse. The day is clearly coming when this status quo will pass. Maybe a long time for that day to come, but it is, I think, coming. It is up to Israelis and Palestinians in the first instance to dismantle this iniquitous system, this unjust system, this unsustainable system, and to put in place one that is more just. But the last thing I want to say is, while it's essentially up to them there, it's also up to us here. Americans bear a very, very, very heavy responsibility in this matter. We are the 900-pound gorilla on the Middle Eastern stage. The United States has upheld this entire discriminatory, unjust structure ever since 1948, ever since the Partition Resolution of 1947. Clearly, a beginning in a new direction, at least in the public sphere in this country, has begun. I would strongly argue that true peace with justice in Palestine for both peoples that live there depends on the continuation of this process in this country. Thank you very much.